My name is Elaine, and at 67, I've learned that a mother's love doesn't always guarantee respect. For decades, I've been the steady foundation in Jeffrey's life, putting his needs above my own even when it broke my heart. I thought his 40th birthday would be different. I helped plan it, paid for half, and baked his favorite cake from scratch. But as I approached the head table, I saw the truth. Before diving into my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Hit that like and subscribe button so we can connect through these shared life lessons. I became a mother at 27, relatively late for my generation. Jeffrey was born on a rainy April morning, all 10 perfect fingers and toes, with eyes that seemed to recognize me instantly. I fell in love with motherhood despite the challenges that quickly followed. When Jeffrey turned 3, Richard, my husband and Jeffrey's father, announced he was leaving us for his secretary. The divorce blindsided me completely. "I need freedom, Elaine," Richard explained while packing his designer suits. "This family life just isn't what I thought it would be." He didn't look me in the eyes when he said it, focusing instead on folding his ties with precision. Suddenly, I found myself a single mother with a mortgage I could barely afford and a toddler who kept asking when Daddy was coming home. I had worked part-time as a bank teller before, but that wouldn't cover our expenses. Within 2 weeks, I had secured a second job waiting tables at night after my mother agreed to watch Jeffrey during my evening shifts. Our lives settled into a grueling routine. I would wake at 5, prepare Jeffrey's lunch and clothes for the day, drop him at my mother's on my way to the bank, work until 4, pick him up, make dinner, then head to the restaurant by 6. I wouldn't return home until after midnight, often finding Jeffrey asleep on my mother's couch. I'd carry him to the car, his small body warm against my chest, and whisper promises that things would get better. Richard's child support checks were inconsistent at best. His new life seemed to leave little room for his previous responsibilities. He would call occasionally, speaking briefly with Jeffrey, making vague promises about visits that rarely materialized. I never knew which hurt more, the disappointment when Richard forgot Jeffrey's birthday or the way Jeffrey's face would light up during those rare appearances, making it clear how desperately he craved his father's approval. Despite the exhaustion that became my constant companion, I was determined to give Jeffrey everything I could. When he wanted to join Little League, I found a way to afford the uniform and equipment, taking on extra shifts to cover the costs. I sat through every game, cheering loudly even when my body ached from standing all day. When parent-teacher conferences came around, I rearranged my schedule, losing valuable hours of pay but gaining the satisfaction of seeing his artwork displayed proudly on classroom walls. "Mom, did you see me catch that ball?" Jeffrey would ask after his games, his face flushed with excitement and pride. "I saw everything, sweetheart," I would answer truthfully, because I did. I never missed a moment I could help. Through these years, I made a promise to myself that I would never speak ill of Richard to Jeffrey. When he asked why his father didn't come to his school play or why other kids had dads who coached their teams, I would carefully explain that his father loved him but wasn't able to be there right now. I believed that maintaining this connection, however tenuous, was important for Jeffrey's sense of identity and worth. "Your father loves you very much," I would tell him, swallowing my own hurt and resentment. Sometimes adults have complicated lives. By the time Jeffrey reached middle school, we had established our own traditions and rhythms. We had movie nights on Fridays where we would rent a film and make homemade pizza together. Sunday mornings meant pancakes shaped like whatever Jeffrey requested: dinosaurs, spaceships, or superheroes. I became adept at creating memories that didn't require money we didn't have. Education was always my priority for him. I spent hours at the kitchen table helping with homework, encouraging his natural aptitude for mathematics. When his teacher suggested he might benefit from advanced classes, I researched scholarships and financial aid options that would allow him these opportunities. Our small 2-bedroom house wasn't in the best school district, but I made sure Jeffrey had a quiet place to study and access to library books. I skipped new clothes for myself for years, ensuring he never felt the pinch of our financial situation when it came to school supplies or educational needs. "Mom, why don't you ever buy anything for yourself?" he asked me once, showing a perceptiveness beyond his years. "Because I have everything I need already," I answered, and in many ways it was true. My happiness had become inextricably linked to his well-being and success. As Jeffrey grew into a teenager, I saw glimpses of the man he would become, intelligent, determined, with a quick wit that reminded me of myself before life had hardened some of my softer edges. We were a team, navigating the world together, and despite the hardships, I felt proud of the life we had built. What I didn't realize was how quickly things could change when Richard decided he wanted back in the picture. Jeffrey had just turned 16 when Richard reappeared in our lives like a sudden storm. After 13 years of minimal contact and sporadic child support, he showed up at Jeffrey's track meet driving a gleaming BMW and wearing an expensive watch that probably cost more than 3 months of my salary combined. I was sitting in the bleachers as I always did, with a thermos of hot chocolate and Jeffrey's favorite post-race snacks. I almost didn't recognize Richard at first. He had put on weight, his hair had thinned, but there was a new confidence in his stance that came with financial success. Beside him stood a slender blonde woman, at least 10 years younger than me, wearing designer sunglasses and a cashmere sweater that draped perfectly over her shoulders. "Elaine," Richard nodded at me with casual familiarity, as if we had seen each other just last week. "This is Belinda, my wife. We thought we'd surprise Jeffrey." Belinda offered me a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Richard talks about Jeffrey all the time. It's wonderful to finally meet you both." I bit back the urge to ask where they had been for the past 13 years, forcing a polite smile instead. "Jeffrey will be surprised to see you." And surprised he was. When Jeffrey finished his race, coming in second place, an achievement he had worked towards all season, and saw his father waiting, his entire face transformed. It was like watching a light switch flip on, illuminating something I hadn't even realized was dim. "Dad," he called out, jogging over to us. "What are you doing here?" Richard clapped him on the shoulder. "Came to see my son compete, of course. This is Belinda, by the way." Jeffrey shook her hand, clearly trying to process this new development. "Nice to meet you. You were fantastic out there," Richard continued. "Second place. That's my boy. How about we celebrate? Dinner anywhere you want, my treat." I stood slightly apart, watching this reunion unfold, feeling simultaneously happy for Jeffrey and somehow erased from the picture. When Jeffrey looked at me questioningly, I nodded encouragement. "Go ahead," I said. "Have fun. I'll see you at home later." That dinner was the beginning of Richard's campaign to re-enter Jeffrey's life, not as the absent father he had been, but as an affluent benefactor eager to make up for lost time with material generosity. Within weeks, Jeffrey had a new smartphone, designer clothes, and promises of driving lessons in Richard's luxury car when he got his permit. I watched with growing unease as Richard and Belinda's influence expanded. They lived in a sprawling house in the wealthiest part of town, complete with a pool and home theater. Jeffrey began spending weekends there, returning home with stories of jet skis at their lake house and dinners at restaurants I could never afford. "Mom, you should see their place," Jeffrey would say, eyes wide with excitement. "Belinda has a closet bigger than my bedroom, and Dad's got this amazing entertainment system." I would nod and ask questions, encouraging him to enjoy these experiences while trying to ignore the knot of worry in my stomach. I couldn't compete with Richard's lifestyle, and part of me feared I was losing my son to a world I couldn't provide. For Jeffrey's 17th birthday, Richard and Belinda gifted him a laptop that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. My gift, a handmade scrapbook documenting his childhood achievements, seemed paltry in comparison. I noticed how quickly he set it aside to return to exploring the laptop's features. The first real blow came when Richard announced he was planning a trip to Europe the following summer, and wanted to take Jeffrey along. "It'll be educational," Richard explained when I expressed concern about Jeffrey missing 2 weeks of school. "France, Italy, Switzerland. He'll learn more there than sitting in a classroom." When I suggested that perhaps I could join them, paying my own way of course, Richard exchanged a look with Belinda before responding. "That's not really what we had in mind, Elaine. This is a chance for me to bond with my son. Besides, I'm not sure you'd enjoy the pace we're planning to keep." The implication was clear. I didn't belong in their world. Jeffrey, caught between his excitement for the trip and loyalty to me, offered a half-hearted, "Maybe next time, Mom." But there never would be a next time that included me. As Richard's presence in Jeffrey's life grew, mine seemed to diminish proportionally. Jeffrey began calling me to say he wouldn't be home for our traditional Friday movie nights because Richard had courtside basketball tickets or Belinda was hosting a party where he could network with the children of their wealthy friends. I noticed subtle changes in Jeffrey himself. He became more conscious of brands, more judgmental of our modest home and lifestyle. Comments slipped out that cut deeper than he probably realized. "Don't you ever want more than this, Mom?" he asked one evening, gesturing around our living room where we had built so many memories. "Dad says with my grades, I could really go places if I have the right connections." "There are different kinds of success, Jeffrey," I responded carefully, "and different paths to get there." But I could see he was already seduced by Richard's version of success. The kind measured in square footage and luxury cars. The kind that had always eluded me despite my hard work. The most painful moments were the ones where I was explicitly excluded. When Jeffrey qualified for a state championship in track, Richard rented a limousine to transport him and some friends to the event. I drove separately, arriving to find they had saved seats in the front row, none for me. I watched from several rows back as Richard and Belinda cheered loudly, making sure everyone knew they were Jeffrey's parents. Afterward, Richard announced he was taking everyone to dinner to celebrate. Jeffrey looked back at me as they were leaving. "You don't mind, do you, Mom? Dad's reserved this fancy place." "Of course not," I said, swallowing my hurt. "Have fun. I'm so proud of you." I drove home alone that night, the car filled with a silence that seemed to mock all the years of sacrifice. But I refused to make Jeffrey feel guilty for enjoying these opportunities. I told myself that a good mother wants more for her child than she had herself, even if that meant watching from the sidelines as someone else provided it. Jeffrey received acceptance letters from several prestigious universities during his senior year. I had been saving for his education since he was a baby, setting aside what little I could from each paycheck. It wasn't enough for 4 years at an elite private university, but combined with scholarships and financial aid, we could make it work at the state school. Richard had other ideas. "I want him at my alma mater," he announced during a tense meeting at their house where I felt like an outsider. "Ivy League connections are priceless in the business world." "That's very generous," I said carefully, "but Jeffrey and I have been planning for State University. His scholarship package is excellent." Jeffrey shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Actually, Mom, Dad and I have been talking. He's offering to cover the full tuition at Princeton. No loans, no debt." The decision had clearly already been made without me. I nodded slowly, understanding that this was an opportunity one couldn't provide and shouldn't deny him. "That's wonderful, Jeffrey. I'm happy for you." Richard smiled triumphantly. "He'll follow in my footsteps. Maybe even join my firm eventually." I didn't mention that the money I'd saved could still help with books or living expenses. From Jeffrey's expression, it was clear he didn't want to be reminded of our years of careful budgeting and sacrifice. That part of his life was being packed away, replaced with Richard's vision of success. When move-in day arrived, I found myself relegated to driving a separate car filled with the few belongings from Jeffrey's room at my house. Richard and Belinda led the procession in their SUV, which contained new bedding, electronics, and furniture they had purchased for his dorm room. On campus, they took charge of the setup while I stood awkwardly by, offering suggestions that were politely ignored. As we prepared to leave, I hugged Jeffrey tightly. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered. "Call me anytime, day or night." "Thanks, Mom," he replied, already distracted by the group of students Richard was introducing him to, children of his business associates and alumni connections. The drive home alone was long and quiet. I passed the time remembering Jeffrey as a little boy, how he would crawl into my lap with books for me to read, how he would save the marshmallows from his cereal to eat last. Memories that now felt like they belonged to another lifetime. During his college years, our relationship shifted further. Phone calls became less frequent, holidays more complicated. Jeffrey would split his time between Richard's lavish celebrations and my simpler ones, often arriving at my house distracted and leaving early. "Sorry, Mom, but Dad's hosting his annual Christmas Eve party and I should make an appearance. Lots of important people there." I would nod understanding, serving him the traditional Christmas Eve dinner I'd prepared before watching him rush off to what he clearly considered the main event. After graduation, Jeffrey accepted a position at Richard's investment firm, moving into a downtown apartment partially funded by his father. His transformation seemed complete, from my son who once collected rocks and built forts from couch cushions to a polished young professional with expensive tastes and ambitious career goals. When Jeffrey met Karen, a young woman from a similarly privileged background, I was happy for him but immediately sensed the further distance it would create. Karen was lovely in many ways, intelligent, accomplished, with impeccable manners, but she viewed me with a kind of polite curiosity, as if I were an anthropological study in middle-class motherhood. "Jeffrey tells me you worked 2 jobs when he was growing up," she said during one of our early meetings. "That must have been so difficult." "You're so brave." Her words were kind but highlighted the gulf between us. To her, my life experiences were foreign and slightly tragic. I became aware of how I dressed when visiting them, conscious of my affordable clothes and sensible shoes among their designer-filled closets. Their wedding was a lavish affair at an exclusive country club, planned primarily by Karen's mother and Belinda, who had formed a fast friendship. I was consulted on minor details and seated at the parents' table during the reception, but felt strangely peripheral to the entire event. Richard gave a lengthy toast about watching his son grow into a man, conveniently omitting the 13 years of absence. When their first child was born, a daughter they named Abigail, I expected to fall naturally into a grandmother's role. Instead, I found myself navigating an unspoken hierarchy. Karen's mother lived closer and was given first priority for babysitting. Belinda hosted elaborate family gatherings where I was included but never quite central. My offers to help were accepted only when convenient. "We have a system, Mom," Jeffrey would explain when I suggested keeping Abigail overnight. "She's on a very specific schedule that Karen's mother helps maintain." I adapted, accepting the crumbs of time with my grandchild, bringing modest gifts that were appreciated but quickly overshadowed by the extravagant ones from Richard and Belinda. When a second grandchild arrived 2 years later, a boy named Thomas, the pattern was already established. Family events became exercises in subtle exclusion. At Thomas's christening, I arrived to find the family photos already taken. "We thought you were running late, Mom, so we went ahead." At Abigail's 4th birthday, I was seated at a table with distant relatives while Richard and Belinda occupied places of honor near the children. Through it all, I maintained my dignity and love for Jeffrey and his family. I never complained, never pointed out the inequities, never made him feel guilty for the life he had chosen. I told myself that what mattered was being part of their lives at all, even if my role had been minimized to that of a supporting character. But as Jeffrey's 40th birthday approached, I harbored a small hope that this milestone might offer an opportunity to reconnect, to remind him of our shared history before Richard's wealth had redrawn the boundaries of our relationship. I couldn't have imagined how painfully this hope would be crushed. Jeffrey's 40th birthday fell on a Saturday in April, and I learned through Karen that they were planning a significant celebration. When I called Jeffrey to ask about it, he seemed surprised by my interest. "It's just a dinner thing," he said vaguely. "Karen's handling most of it." "I'd love to help," I offered. "Maybe I could contribute to the costs or help with planning. 40 is a big milestone." There was a pause before he replied. "Actually, that would be nice, Mom. Let me have Karen call you." Karen's call came 3 days later, polite but clearly unexpected. "Jeffrey mentioned you wanted to be involved," she said. "We've already booked the venue and caterer, but there are still some details to finalize." "I'd be happy to help with anything," I said eagerly. "And I'd like to contribute financially too." "That's generous," Karen replied. "The venue is quite exclusive, so it's running more than we initially budgeted." We settled on an amount that represented a significant portion of my savings, but felt worth it to be meaningfully involved in this celebration. During the conversation, I suggested we consider the Belmont, a restaurant that had been Jeffrey's favorite for special occasions during his high school years. "Oh, we've already booked the Madison Club," Karen explained. "Richard is a member there." "Of course," I said, hiding my disappointment. "That will be lovely." Over the following weeks, I tried to insert myself into the planning process, offering suggestions that were politely acknowledged but rarely implemented. When I mentioned that chocolate raspberry cake had always been Jeffrey's favorite, Karen seemed surprised. "Really? He always asks for vanilla bean with buttercream when I bake. But that's good to know. A small part of me wanted to explain that for 18 years, before Richard's reappearance and before Karen, I had baked Jeffrey a chocolate raspberry cake for every birthday. Instead, I simply said, maybe his tastes have changed. Despite this, I decided to bake his childhood favorite cake as my special contribution to the celebration. I spent hours perfecting the recipe, making a test cake first to ensure it was as delicious as I remembered. The rich chocolate layers with raspberry filling had been Jeffrey's request every year, even when money was tight and a store-bought cake would have been easier. For his gift, I wanted something meaningful rather than expensive. I spent weeks visiting antique stores until I found a small wooden box with intricate carvings similar to one his grandfather had owned. I filled it with carefully chosen mementos. His first pair of baby shoes that I had bronzed years ago but never given him, photographs of special moments throughout his childhood, the receipt from when I had paid off our mortgage early to ensure his college fund would be secure, and medical bills showing how I had postponed my own needed dental work to afford his sports equipment. The most important item was a letter I wrote expressing my unconditional love, acknowledging the distance that had grown between us but reaffirming my pride in the man he had become. I wrote about memories he might have forgotten, how he would wait up for me after my late shifts, how we would count stars from our backyard on summer nights, how brave he had been when he broke his arm at 10 and worried more about missing his baseball game than his own pain. As the party approached, I received the formal invitation. It listed me simply as Elaine Wilson among the general guests, while Richard and Belinda were designated as father and mother of the guest of honor. I told myself this was just an oversight, that formalities didn't reflect the true nature of relationships. The day before the party, I called Jeffrey to confirm the time I should arrive to help set up. Everything's being handled by the club staff, Mom, he said. Just come at the time on the invitation like everyone else. But I thought I could help arrange things, maybe put out the family photos I've collected. Karen has hired a decorator with a specific aesthetic in mind, he replied. But thanks for the thought. I hung up feeling deflated but still hopeful that the actual celebration would bridge some of the distance between us. I spent that evening putting the finishing touches on my homemade cake and wrapping the special gift box with paper I had hand-stamped with his initials. The morning of the party, I dressed carefully in a new blue dress I had purchased for the occasion, styling my hair and applying makeup with more attention than usual. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman who had aged gracefully despite life's hardships, someone who had sacrificed willingly for love. I hoped Jeffrey would see the same. I arrived at the Madison Club 30 minutes before the invitation time, carrying my cake in a special container and the gift box in a tote bag. Despite Jeffrey's assurance that everything was handled, I wanted to be there early, to see his face when he arrived, to be part of creating the special day rather than merely attending it. The club staff seemed confused by my early arrival, but directed me to the private dining room that had been reserved for the party. The space was elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens. Professional decorators were putting final touches on elaborate floral arrangements and hanging a large banner reading, 40 and Fabulous. I approached a young woman who appeared to be supervising. Hello, I'm Jeffrey's mother. I brought a special cake. Where should I put it? She consulted her clipboard. We have the catering order here. 3-tier vanilla bean cake with buttercream and fondant decorations. There must be some confusion. This is just an extra, personal one, I explained. A childhood favorite. After some discussion, she reluctantly directed me to a side table where my homemade creation looked out of place among the professional catering. I straightened my shoulders and moved toward the main dining area, where place cards were being arranged on elegantly set tables. That's when I saw it. The seating arrangement that would crystallize years of subtle exclusion into one unmistakable statement. The head table was positioned at the front of the room, clearly visible to all other guests. Place cards marked each setting in elegant calligraphy. I moved closer, searching for my name, assuming I would be seated near Jeffrey as his mother. Instead, I saw Jeffrey's place at the center, with Karen to his left. To his right was a place card reading Belinda, and next to that, Richard. Even more shocking was a small cushion seat placed between Richard and another guest, labeled Max. Their family dog, a golden retriever Jeffrey had adopted on Richard's suggestion 3 years earlier. I stood frozen, staring at the arrangement, unable to process what it so clearly communicated. My position in Jeffrey's life had fallen below not just his stepmother, but even the family pet. I checked the other tables, finally locating my name at a table near the back, seated with Karen's distant cousins whom I had met only once before. As I stood there, Jeffrey and Karen entered, followed by Richard and Belinda. Jeffrey spotted me and came over looking surprised. "Mom, you're early. The invitation said 7. I wanted to help set up," I explained, my voice unnaturally calm. "Jeffrey, I noticed the seating arrangements." He glanced toward the head table, then back at me, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face before being replaced with casual dismissal. "Yeah, we had to make some adjustments. Karen's parents are coming from out of town, and Richard made a special effort to fly back from his business trip in Tokyo." "I see," I said quietly. "And Max has a seat at the head table." Jeffrey laughed, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Karen insisted. You know how she treats that dog like a child." I nodded slowly, gathering my courage. "I thought perhaps as your mother, I might be seated closer to you. For your 40th birthday." Something shifted in Jeffrey's expression, a hardening I had seen more frequently over the years. "Come on, Mom. You always like staying in the background. You're just back where you belong." The casual cruelty of his words struck me like a physical blow. In that moment, every sacrifice, every night I had gone without sleep to care for him, every comfort I had denied myself to provide for him, flashed through my mind in stark relief against this dismissal. Guests began arriving, filling the room with cheerful conversation and laughter. I moved through the growing crowd on autopilot, exchanging pleasantries and deflecting questions about why I wasn't sitting at the family table. With each interaction, the weight on my chest grew heavier, making it difficult to maintain the pleasant expression I had perfected over years of putting others' comfort above my own. During the appetizer course, I watched as Jeffrey laughed at something Belinda whispered to him, as Richard placed a proprietary hand on his shoulder, as even Max was fed tidbits from Jeffrey's plate. I sat among strangers who occasionally asked polite questions about Jeffrey's childhood, but seemed more interested in discussing their recent vacations and home renovations. The dinner progressed with toasts from Richard, who spoke at length about how proud he was of the man Jeffrey had become, conveniently omitting how little he had contributed to that process. Karen's father spoke about welcoming Jeffrey into their family. When Belinda stood to share humorous anecdotes about family holidays and traditions, I felt myself becoming invisible, my years of motherhood being systematically erased from the narrative. No one asked me to speak. No one acknowledged the single mother who had worked double shifts to provide Jeffrey with opportunities, who had sat through homework sessions and doctor's appointments, who had been both mother and father during the years Richard was absent. As the main course was cleared and preparations made to bring out the professional cake, I made my decision. With quiet dignity, I retrieved the small gift box from my tote bag and approached the head table. Jeffrey looked up, surprise evident on his face. "I wanted to give you this before I go," I said softly, placing the wooden box beside his plate. "You're leaving? We haven't even had cake," he replied, more concerned with the disruption to the schedule than my departure. "I think it's best," I answered. "Happy birthday, Jeffrey." Before he could respond, I turned and walked steadily toward the exit, my head held high despite the tears threatening to spill. Behind me, I heard the murmur of conversation as Jeffrey presumably opened the box. I had reached the door when the room fell suddenly silent. I didn't turn around, but I could imagine the scene: the photographs spread out, the bronzed baby shoes, the evidence of a mother's lifetime of sacrifice laid bare before the very people who had benefited from its erasure. I stepped out into the cool evening air, finally allowing the tears to fall freely as I walked to my car. For the first time in 40 years, I had put my own dignity above Jeffrey's comfort. It felt both terrible and necessary, like lancing a wound that had festered too long. As I drove home alone, I wondered if I had just severed what remained of our relationship. The thought brought fresh pain but also a strange sense of peace. I had finally stood up for my place in my son's life, and regardless of the outcome, I had reclaimed something essential to my own sense of worth. The contents of the wooden box I left behind told a story that words alone could not convey. The bronzed baby shoes, tiny and perfect, represented Jeffrey's first steps I had encouraged with outstretched arms and joyful praise. The photographs captured moments that defined our journey together. Jeffrey missing his front teeth while proudly holding up a fish we had caught together at the community pond. Jeffrey in his first school play where he had only one line but delivered it with such conviction that I had cried with pride. Jeffrey receiving his high school diploma, looking back at me in the audience with a smile that acknowledged all we had overcome together. The mortgage payment receipt was dated the year Jeffrey turned 16, showing the final payment on our modest home. What it didn't show was how I had taken on additional weekend work cleaning offices to make those extra payments, ensuring the house would be fully paid before his college years so I could redirect those funds toward his education. The medical bills revealed a story I had never shared with Jeffrey. When he was 14 and determined to make the competitive travel baseball team, I had postponed dental surgery I desperately needed, using the insurance coverage and savings for his sports equipment instead. The constant pain I endured that season was nowhere reflected in the enthusiastic cheers he would have heard from the bleachers. But perhaps most revealing was the letter, written in my careful handwriting on simple stationery. My dearest Jeffrey, as you turn 40 today, I find myself reflecting on the journey we have shared. From the moment you were placed in my arms, you became the center of my world, not as a burden, but as my greatest joy and purpose. I want you to know that every sacrifice was made willingly. Every long night working 2 jobs was sustained by thoughts of your future. Every difficult choice was guided by what would serve you best. I have never regretted a single moment of being your mother. Our relationship has changed over the years as all relationships do. I have tried to step back and allow you to create your own life, your own family, your own traditions. Perhaps I have stepped back too far, becoming a shadow in the life I once was central to. That is my failing, not yours. I don't write this to burden you with guilt or obligation, but to make sure you know how deeply you are loved, not for your accomplishments or status, but simply for being the boy who once waited up for me after late shifts, who made me dandelion bouquets, who trusted me to chase away the monsters under the bed. Whatever place you choose to give me in your life now, know that in my heart, you will always be my greatest achievement and my most precious gift. All my love, Mom. As I drove home from the party, I could only imagine the scene unfolding behind me. The laughter and celebration would have halted as Jeffrey opened the box, as the physical evidence of my dedication was exposed for all to see. Richard and Belinda, who had stepped into the story halfway through and claimed the happy ending as their creation, would have been confronted with the foundation their narrative conveniently ignored. Karen, who had known only the successful adult Jeffrey had become, not the child who had been shaped by years of modest means and maternal devotion, would perhaps see her husband through new eyes. And Jeffrey himself, caught between the competing versions of his own history, would face a moment of truth that could no longer be avoided. My phone rang several times that evening, but I let it go to voicemail. I needed space to process my own emotions, to honor the grief that had been building for years as I watched myself become increasingly peripheral in my son's life. For once, I put my own healing first. The first message came from Karen, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Elaine, we hope you're okay. Please call when you can. The second was from Jeffrey, anger evident in his clipped tones. Mom, I can't believe you would cause a scene like that and then just leave. Call me back. The third, coming nearly an hour later, was Jeffrey again, his voice now subdued. Mom, I didn't know about the medical bills. Or the mortgage. Why didn't you ever tell me? Please call me. I slept poorly that night, alternating between confidence in my decision to finally stand up for myself and anxiety about the potential permanent damage to our relationship. By morning, I had resolved to let Jeffrey make the next move. For 40 years, I had been the one maintaining our connection, making excuses for his behavior, accommodating his new life at the expense of my dignity. It was time for him to demonstrate whether I truly mattered to him. 3 days passed with no contact beyond those initial voicemails. I returned to my routine volunteering at the community library, tending my small garden, meeting friends for coffee. I didn't share what had happened, preferring to process my feelings privately. On the 4th day, a flower delivery arrived, an elaborate arrangement with a card reading simply, I'm sorry. Please call. Jeffrey. I appreciated the gesture but wasn't ready for a conversation that might be dominated by polite apologies without real understanding. I needed to know that Jeffrey truly recognized the pattern that had developed, not just this single incident. A week after the party, Karen called again. "Elaine, I wanted to let you know that we've been talking a lot, Jeffrey, his father, and I. The contents of that box. It's opened up conversations we should have had years ago. Jeffrey's struggling with a lot of realizations right now." "Thank you for telling me," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Your cake was delicious, by the way," she added unexpectedly. "Jeffrey insisted on having it served. He said it was exactly how he remembered from his childhood birthdays." This small acknowledgement of our shared history touched me more deeply than I expected. That's kind of him. 2 more weeks passed. Small texts arrived from Jeffrey. Not substantive conversations, but apparent attempts to maintain connection. "Thought of you when I heard this song on the radio today. Abigail drew a picture of you at school. Remember that time we got caught in the rainstorm at the baseball game?" I responded warmly but briefly to each, not yet ready to pretend everything was normal. I understood he was trying in his way to build a bridge back to me, but some damage requires more than casual repair. Then 3 weeks after the birthday party, my doorbell rang on a Sunday afternoon. I opened it to find Jeffrey standing alone, holding the wooden gift box I had left behind. Jeffrey stood on my doorstep, looking more vulnerable than I had seen him in years. Gone was the polished businessman with his confident stance and designer clothes. Instead, he shifted his weight uncomfortably, dressed in a simple sweater and jeans that reminded me of his college days. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside to let him enter the modest home where he had grown up, watching as his eyes traveled over the familiar surroundings. Many things remained unchanged: the worn but comfortable sofa where we had spent countless evenings, the wall of photographs documenting his growth from infancy to adulthood, the small kitchen table where we had shared meals and homework sessions. He sat down on the sofa, placing the wooden box carefully on the coffee table between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the weight of years of unaddressed hurts filling the space between us. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Jeffrey finally said. "About the party, about what was in this box, about everything." I nodded but remained silent, giving him space to continue. "At first I was angry," he admitted. "I thought you were trying to embarrass me, to make me feel guilty in front of everyone. But then I really looked at what was in here." He touched the box gently, and I started remembering things I hadn't thought about in years. He pulled out the bronze baby shoes. "I remember you telling me how you saved for months to have these done." He set them down and retrieved the mortgage statement. "But you never told me about this. Or the medical bills." "It wasn't your burden to carry," I said quietly. "You were a child." "But I'm not a child anymore," he countered, meeting my eyes directly. "And I've been acting like one, entitled, selfish, taking you for granted." He shook his head. "When did I start treating you like you were disposable, Mom?" The directness of his question caught me off guard. I had prepared for polite apologies, for promises to include me more in the future, but not for this level of self-awareness. "It happened gradually," I replied honestly. "When your father came back into your life, it was natural for you to want his approval, his lifestyle. I understood that. But you never said anything. All these years, as I pushed you further into the background, you just accepted it. I thought that's what mothers were supposed to do: step back and let their children live their lives without guilt or obligation." Jeffrey leaned forward, his expression pained. "There's a difference between giving me space to live my own life and being treated like you don't matter." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "God, Mom, we had the dog at the head table and you were seated with people you barely know. How did I become someone who would do that?" The raw honesty of his self-recrimination moved me. "We all make mistakes, Jeffrey. The important thing is recognizing them. Karen's been pretty relentless about making sure I do," he said with a rueful smile. "After you left and I opened this box, she was, well, horrified doesn't really cover it. She had no idea about most of this history, about everything you did for me. I never told her." He reached for one of the photographs, Jeffrey at 10, arm in a cast, sitting in a hospital waiting room with me beside him, both of us making silly faces at the camera despite the circumstances. I remember this day, he said softly. I was so scared about the pain, but more worried about missing the championship game. You told me jokes for hours to keep my mind off it. You were so brave, I recalled. More concerned about letting your team down than your own arm. You know what I don't remember from that day? Dad. He didn't show up, did he? I hesitated, my old habit of protecting Richard's image warring with the need for honesty.
No.
I called him, but he had an important meeting. Jeffrey nodded slowly. He had a lot of important meetings back then. He set the photograph down carefully. The thing is, Mom, I've been letting him rewrite my history. Our history. I've been acting like he was always there. Like the life I have now is the only one that matters. You were young when he came back, I said gently. You needed your father. Stop making excuses for me, Jeffrey said firmly. I'm 40 years old. I've had plenty of time to see the truth and acknowledge it. Instead, I've been treating the person who was always there for me like an afterthought, while celebrating the one who showed up halfway through the story. He stood up and paced the small living room, years of suppressed realizations finally breaking through. You know what really got me? The medical bills. You were in pain for months so I could play baseball and I didn't even notice. What kind of son doesn't notice his mother is suffering? A normal teenager focused on his own life, I answered. Jeffrey, I never wanted you to worry about adult problems. But that's just it, he said, stopping to face me. I'm not a teenager anymore. I should have been paying attention, asking questions, making sure you were okay. Instead, I've been so wrapped up in Richard's world, in proving I belong there, that I stopped seeing what was right in front of me. He returned to the sofa, sitting closer to me this time. When you walked out of that party, it was like something finally clicked into place. I saw myself through your eyes, and I didn't like what I saw. His honesty moved me deeply. This was the connection I had been missing. Not just being included in events or seated at the right table, but being truly seen and valued. So where do we go from here? I asked quietly. Jeffrey took a deep breath. I want to rebuild our relationship. Not just surface politeness or obligation, but real connection. I want my children to know the grandmother who shaped who I am, not just as an occasional visitor, but as an essential part of our family. That would mean a lot to me, I admitted. But I need you to promise me something too, he continued. Don't let me get away with taking you for granted again. Call me out when I'm being thoughtless or selfish. I've gotten too comfortable with you accepting whatever scraps of attention I offer. I nodded, recognizing the truth in his words. My reluctance to rock the boat, to demand the respect I deserved, had contributed to the imbalance in our relationship. I can do that, I promised. It might take some practice though. I've spent a lot of years putting your feelings above my own. I know, he said softly, and I took advantage of that.
I'm sorry, Mom.
Truly sorry. We talked for hours that afternoon, discussing painful truths and happy memories, acknowledging hurts and misunderstandings that had accumulated over years. There were moments of tears, of laughter, of quiet reflection. It wasn't a magical fix, too much had happened for that, but it was an honest beginning. Before Jeffrey left, he asked if I would come to dinner at his house the following Sunday. Just family, he emphasized. You, me, Karen, the kids. No Richard or Belinda. I'd like that, I said, walking him to the door. He hugged me then, a real embrace that reminded me of when he was younger, before layers of distance had built up between us. I love you, Mom. Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I deserved it. In the weeks and months that followed, we worked to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect, rather than just maternal devotion. There were setbacks. Old habits don't disappear overnight, and Jeffrey sometimes slipped back into taking me for granted. But true to my promise, I began speaking up when I felt overlooked or disregarded. Karen became an unexpected ally in this process, making conscious efforts to include me in family decisions and traditions. The children need to know their grandmother, she insisted. The real you, not just the occasional visitor. My relationship with Richard and Belinda remained complicated. At larger family gatherings, there was an initial awkwardness as the power dynamic shifted, but gradually a new equilibrium emerged. one where my role as Jeffrey's mother was acknowledged rather than minimized. The most profound change was within myself. For decades, I had defined my worth primarily through my identity as Jeffrey's mother, measuring my success by his happiness even when it came at the expense of my own. Learning to value myself independently, to require respect rather than just hoping for it, was a challenging but necessary evolution. Standing up for myself that night at the birthday party had been terrifying, but it opened the door to a more authentic relationship with my son, one based on mutual respect rather than just obligation and history. Sometimes love means having the courage to walk away, to force the other person to see the consequences of their actions, rather than quietly accepting mistreatment. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have stayed at the party, maintaining the status quo, or found the strength to make your feelings known? Have you ever had to stand up to someone you love to maintain your own dignity and self-respect? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of family healing and personal growth. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, true love includes respect, not just affection.